Right, let's go. Welcome to my podcast. Today we've got Dr. Brooke Scheller on, author of this wonderful book, How to Eat to Change How You Drink. It's a fabulous book. You sent it to me, which I'm really, really grateful. I haven't been through the whole book yet, but what I have read is very impressive. So well done. It's brilliant. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Dave. I'm excited to be here.
Brilliant. So, as I say, I've read some of your book, and it's brilliant. But I would like to know a little bit more about your own journey, because I believe that on the recording of this today, you are 1001 days sober, which is highly commendable. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yesterday I celebrated 1,000 days, and I think they call that the comma club, that you make it to the comma club because you've got a comma now in your day count. But yeah, it's really exciting, and I know you probably share the same sentiment, and so many people do, that it gets better and better as we go along. We continue learning, we continue growing, and that's how I feel when I see that number climb, and it's exciting to see it keep going up.
Well, how your life has changed, and you're helping so many others as well. But what did your relationship with alcohol look like?
Yeah, I share a little bit about my story in really like the Cliff Notes version of my story in the book, in the second chapter, which I titled The Doctor in the Wine Bottle. And by trade, I'm a doctor of nutrition. I received multiple graduate degrees while I was still drinking. And for so long, I was on that mission, like so many people are, to prove that you can drink alcohol and be healthy. And when I share this part, a lot of people relate to drinking alcohol and then trying to drink the green juices and take the supplements and exercise and do all of the things to quote unquote reverse or negate the alcohol behavior. And I was a product of that myself. I started drinking at a really young age, 13, not unlikely. I mean, it's somewhat common for many of us to start drinking in our teenage years, and experienced some family trauma in my late teen years that, looking back now, I believe did have a pretty significant effect on my seeking validation and acceptance from friends, and spending a lot of time with friends, and of course finding the friends who were drinking and using drugs and smoking cigarettes and all that quote unquote bad stuff. And I didn't have a whole lot of oversight at that time. My parents were having some personal things going on in their own stories, and I was kind of left to my own devices. Luckily, I had a lot of strong voices around me that pushed me to go to college and pushed me to, continue searching and growing and learning. And I'm really grateful for that, because I do believe that even though I was a pretty heavy alcohol user, I always had that good foundation of go to school, stay in school, get a good job, all of those things. But of course, that made me a pretty high functioning person, high functioning alcoholic in that regard, that I was able to kind of keep on this front and this level head and make it look like from the outside my life was okay. But the reality was I was really suffering. I was experiencing pretty extreme anxiety and depression. I was having difficulties with relationships, friendships, and just really living in my own personal health. And I didn't realize for so long that alcohol was the thread through that. It wasn't until June of 2021, which is when I ended up getting sober, that I didn't have any specific rock bottom moments. I didn't have a typical DUI or loss of a job or anything monumental happen in my life, but it was the culmination of a lot of really painful experiences that I kind of got to the end of my rope and said, I think that I have to try this, because the way that I'm going is it's not going to get any better. I started to really see that alcohol was the thread, the through line there. And really grateful that I was able to find a community. I was, started in 12-step programs and really started to find a new way of living. I had never, like so many of us, I had never had any other means of coping with stress or breakups or life. And that has been, one of the biggest parts of this journey is learning all of those tools.
100%. And, I quite often quote the Gabor Mate saying, not why the addiction, why the pain. And a lot of it does come to us burying feelings, numbing things out and that. And it interests me that you were learning, you say you have multiple degrees and that you was learning about nutrition. Was there any part of your drinking that you thought, God, alcohol really isn't doing me any good on a physical and psychological way as well? Or was you in denial of it at the time?
Well, it's really interesting because, and I share it in the book about how I felt like I was living a double life for a while, but that didn't start, when I was in my earlier part of my nutrition trainings. All of my friends were drinkers. We were in college. It was not something that was spoken about. Even in a lot of nutrition training, they don't talk to us a whole lot about alcohol, which is interesting because it's technically a nutrition topic. It's a substance that our
Mm.
body metabolizes just like any other beverage or food that we would drink. So it's almost shocking, and something I feel really passionate about changing is nutritionists and experts in health need to be learning about this. For so long, it's been this kind of like other than thing, this separate topic that, oh, unless you're trained in addiction or are in that field, then, otherwise health experts don't touch it. And that's something we really need to start bringing together because it's creating a huge dissonance between the two and that is something that I found, for so long I was able to really justify it because I was working with other wellness practitioners who were drinking like I did. I was going to conferences with other doctors and holistic practitioners who were getting drunk at the end of the conference. So there is still a lot of alcohol in the health and wellness world, unfortunately. And the statistics even around medical doctors and nurses who use alcohol, because it's a high stress job. High
Mm.
stress job. It's a, really difficult path to get there. And so there's really high levels of alcohol use and abuse in health. And so it took me a while to recognize that that disconnect was even happening. That when I finally got to the end and when I finally did quit drinking and I recognized the shame that I initially felt of being this health expert and having this problem, that I recognized there's a huge missing piece here because why am I, if I'm supposed to be the expert and know all of these things, how is it that there is so much that I still didn't know, having a doctorate degree and a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate in nutrition,
Mm.
right? And so it's something that I've become really passionate about sharing and changing the narrative around.
I salute you for that because if you go to a doctor's in the UK, and that's now if you can actually get a physical appointment, they're actually not trained to really deal with it. If you go and say, I'm really drinking too much, it's either go to AA or
Mhm.
reduce,
Mhm.
and that's about the only knowledge you get, And also, I had a guest on who's a doctor who talks about the menopause and the symptoms of menopause and the amount of women that there's such a comparison of drinking heavily to the symptoms of the menopause. And it feels like we're in the dark ages a little bit. So, this whole thing about denial of alcohol and what it does to our nervous system and our gut health and all of that and our mental health, physical health, it feels like we're way behind on that.
We are quite behind in this. And part of what makes my book a little bit unique is it does talk about those areas. There's a chapter on gut health and the gut microbiome. There's a chapter on hormones, both for men and for women, because it also affects men. There's a chapter on the brain, and especially one of the things that I think is really fascinating are the nutrient deficiencies that can occur as the result of heavy alcohol use and how those very nutrients, things like our B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, these are all actually really critical nutrients for the production, the body's natural production of serotonin and
Mm.
dopamine and GABA, right? So if we look at alcohol as a potential deficiency in dopamine or alcoholism, alcohol use disorder. Well, if we are consuming alcohol and depleting out these important nutrients, that's making the problem worse. If we can recognize and understand if there are nutrient deficiencies present, we can use supplementation, we can strategically use food in order to support and boost dopamine naturally. And that's a really, really great tool for a lot of people, because not only is it going to make us feel better physically, it's going to help us feel more energy, better mood, but it's also going to potentially protect us from going back to drinking behaviors in the future.
Absolutely. I went to the doctors, I think it was about 2017, and I said, I'm depressed. And he didn't ask me about my lifestyle or my drinking. He put me on a dose of antidepressants. And it was later on I realized, or I found out having some genetic tests, that I'm naturally low in serotonin anyway. So alcohol, as you just explained, depletes serotonin, dopamine, and whatever. So surely it would be to look at my lifestyle before putting me on antidepressants. But I was put on them, and 6 months later, obviously, I was still drinking heavily. I still was depressed and went back and he doubled my dose up. So no information was required from the doctor about lifestyle, what are my eating habits, do I exercise, do I drink, which is the big number one. Because if I said to him, oh, I drink a litre of vodka a night, well, there's a solution. But also about, gut health, which we can go on to talk about. Now, I've just finished the Zoe. I don't know if you know of Zoe. It's a program you can do, and they do like stool samples, blood tests, and whatever. And it works out about your blood fat, blood sugars, and a big one is your gut health as well. And since stopping drinking, I've really improved in a lot of areas, but one is nutrition. And my gut health came back as excellent. But it was interesting because I was listening to a podcast with Stephen Bartlett, and there was a guy on there talking about gut health. And he's actually called the poo scientist. And yeah, so you know about that. So these are the kind of people that when I send my sample off, they analyze my stool to see what my gut health was like. And it really surprised me in this podcast that at the end of it, after he said that actually alcohol completely destroys your microbiome in your gut, in your stomach, where your microbiome's everywhere, isn't it? Destroys
it in the intestinal tract.
Yeah. And he said, Stephen Bartlett said, so you don't drink then? He said, no, I do actually. That's the next on the list. And it's like, oh my God, you've literally just explained how terrible alcohol is for your microbiome. It's fascinating in the industry. And I suppose it goes back to what you said when you was learning to be a nutritionist, doctor and whatever. And it's almost like there's still this denial that goes on there, that we got blinkers on.
Yeah, it is. And I love that you did this, Dave, because this is what I do with my clients. We do, when I work one-on-one with clients, we do extensive lab testing, including stool tests, blood tests, et cetera. And we're looking at this type of information because it can be really important, not in only understanding where your health is at baseline, but especially if people are experiencing any type of symptoms or diagnoses, especially with women in that I work with a lot of women in that menopausal timeframe, either pre or post menopause. And, we're looking at trying to identify what is the root cause of health. And part of the reason why I launched my program, the approach that I practice, which is called Functional Sobriety. Functional Sobriety is a nutrition and really root cause approach to supporting an alcohol-free lifestyle. So it's taking these principles of functional medicine, root cause medicine, and applying that to supporting a sober or sober curious lifestyle. Because these are some of the really important things, just like you mentioned, Dave, that our gut microbiome not only plays a role in our digestion, but the microbes in our gut help to produce serotonin and dopamine, help to support our mood. They help to improve our immune system. They support and affect our skin health. They affect our hormone balance. It affects really every other system of the body. So the gut microbiome, they actually call the gut now the second brain.
Yeah.
And that is because it plays actually a huge influence on our brain, which is really the control center of our body. And so by understanding more of this on our own selves, if we know that we have, not enough probiotic bacteria, or we have imbalances in the gut, we can then eat and supplement and choose lifestyle factors that can help and to support that. But it's interesting but not surprising to me that, again, the experts in these fields are still struggling with these things, because you can know everything there is to know about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to apply it in your own life. And as so many of us know in this topic, alcohol is insidious. It is extremely insidious. And I get into arguments on the internet, oftentimes on social media, with other wellness experts that are really still trying to argue that, hey, but sitting around a table with your friends and having a glass of wine is a great stress reliever, and it's bringing people together, and it's abolishing social isolism and those types of other things. But it's really just a crutch, that we should be able to find other ways to connect with people. And as health experts, as a doctor of nutrition, a medical doctor, as someone who's an expert, we should be the ones telling people that that is not the first thing that you should be going to. Because what we've done is we've created a society that is now addicted. And we see that even by these practitioners being addicted too.
I mean, I went to a charity cancer event and there was a free bar there. It's that kind of thing we're talking about, isn't it? It's all about, I think, educating without sounding judgmental. It's like peppering the information in there and letting people make their own minds up, because since I've stopped drinking, I've really looked into the brain, what alcohol does to the brain. But another thing is fascinating subject as well, I love talking about, is the genetics, because I have a lot of clients come to me and they say, well, no wonder I'm like the way I am, because my dad's an alcoholic, or my granddad, or my uncle. What's your take on the genetics?
So this is a quite a controversial topic, because, and as it is in so many other areas, not just with alcohol use, but there's always a question of nature versus nurture, right? Like how much of our the situations that affect us as adults, how much of it is truly in our genes, and how much of it is, if our father is an alcoholic, for example, and we grew up in a home where it is acceptable to be drinking alcohol on a regular basis, it is, status quo to be in an environment like that, that is a huge piece of it too, right? So there's a lot of discussion around how much is, nature, the genes, versus nurture or our environment. And the really interesting thing about genetics is that about 90% of our genetics are able to be turned on or turned off based on our lifestyle, right? So we can have genes that maybe make us more or less likely to develop an alcohol use disorder. But if we never expose ourselves to alcohol, we might never actually turn those genes on. If we eat a healthy diet, if we have, if we exercise, if we take good care of our health, we might never turn on genes that can code for the development of cancer, right? So again, 90% of these genes, we call it epigenetics, that the genes are basically modifiable. We can kind of turn them on or turn them off like a light switch based on our lifestyles. And the other thing that's really interesting about genetics is that there isn't, especially so specific to alcohol use or alcohol use disorder, is that there isn't one specific gene that says, if you have this gene, this is the one that means you may be more or less likely to develop an alcohol use disorder. And I talk about this in the book as well, that really there's research around hundreds of different genes and their ability to be associated with alcohol use disorder. Some of them are genes that affect the liver and how our body metabolizes alcohol. Some people metabolize it more quickly. Some people metabolize it a little bit more slowly. Some of the other genes include, how we produce dopamine or serotonin in the brain. Other genes, even things like our hunger and satiety hormones, have been linked to the development of alcohol use disorder. So it isn't like, yes, if you have a family history of alcoholism, that this is coded in your genes for you to be this way. Sure, you're going to share some of these genes with your family, but it always still becomes that question of our lifestyle. And again, thinking of how much of this is environmental based on what we have been exposed to in our lives. And again, if there's research that shows that if we have a family member in the home with an alcohol use history, that makes us more likely to, again, because we're being exposed to that as something that is normal and part of what we experience as love or acceptance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So why is it then that, in my experience, the majority of people that develop a problem with alcohol, including me, when you say you have the ability of switching on and off the genes, that, for instance, I'm 5 years sober, and if I had a drink now, my brain would say to me, let's get back on it then. What is that? If you say we have the ability to switch them on and off, why is it the majority? And I talk about this a lot, about moderation. That I believe that there's a high percentage of people that once they reach a certain point, it's almost impossible for them to moderate. What can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, and I don't have a ton of information on this. I was just talking to someone about this the other day, but essentially there is, and I don't want to speak to something that I don't know enough about, but some of what the suggestion is that we develop receptors in our brain. And the more that we basically desensitize our body to alcohol, we don't ever go back to what we were previously, right? So the more of these receptors that we develop, the more we kind of get this overstimulation or overexcitability from alcohol. And therefore, those don't go away. So once we put the alcohol back in the system, we still have that kind of higher tolerance built up to we basically don't start from where we did when we initially started drinking.
Yeah. I've got this analogy that I use. I'm very visual, and it's like I always look at people that have never had a problem with alcohol, like me and gambling. I've never ever had a problem with gambling. I don't care if I never go in a betting shop or put money on a horse ever again. It's not my thing. So you get the people that can take or leave drinking. So I see this Wimbledon tennis final with the net down the middle, and you got the umpire. And the person that doesn't really drink occasionally might go up to the net a little bit, but they go back to the baseline. I leapt over the net years ago, right? And I go to
Right.
try and go back, and the umpire said, no, you've gone past that now. You're never going back. And I can really see it like that this is why it keeps me where I am, because I know I look at it like I'm allergic to it, Brooke, because I am in a way, because I know that if I ever did take a drink, it would be terrible. It would be like jumping off a cliff for me. But in a way, that's good for me because that's my boundaries. Just don't ever go there, and I'm safe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that analogy of an allergy, which was really spoken about a lot from the early AA literature, right, about an allergy, is a great way of looking at it because it's essentially what's happening. It's not an allergy in the sense of, that we might think of if someone has a peanut allergy and they eat a peanut, they get an anaphylactic response, they could potentially die from that. But it is in a very similar sense, your body is reacting in a specific way that is unhealthy for you. It is creating this compulsion, or it's creating this situation that is unique, not unique, against other people with a similar experience of alcohol use disorder. But it is a response, a reaction that you're having that is similar to what is happening in an allergy. And that analogy helps a lot of people to understand that, if you had a peanut allergy, you would not touch the peanut, right? And so if we can think about it in this kind of apples to apples way about being an allergy, it helps us understand it. And I think it helps other people understand it too, because people recognize that as a common or recognizable example.
I understand that. It's brilliant. So,
Mhm.
when I stopped drinking, I had tests previous to that, and I had cholesterol levels of 9. I had blood pressure 184 over 126. I was 20 stone. I think, I don't know how many kg that is, probably 125, something like that. And I had chronic acid reflux as well. I was on 4 different medications and
Mhm.
antidepressants as well. And 5 years later, I'm on nothing, like literally nothing. I eat really well. My sleep's a little bit all over the place, but that could be other things. But I exercise, so I feel better now than I did when I was 30. But can you explain in your terms, what alcohol actually does to our nervous system and our nutrition wise, how it depletes our nervous system and why we feel so rubbish? But also after that, is that so many people say to me, "Oh, I've given up for a month or 2 months or 3 months. I still feel rubbish."
Mhm. Yeah, oftentimes when people give it up and they still feel a little yucky, that tells me that there's more work to do in terms of rebalancing the body and the systems. So in the book, I kind of break it down into 3 key areas. So I talk about the hormonal system, I talk about the gut and the gut microbiome, and then I talk about the brain. And so if we think about it in these 3 categories, and we could kind of talk about the different ways that alcohol affects the body in these 3 buckets almost. But I think what you're first asking me about is the nervous system, which I would categorize under that system of the brain, because the brain and our nerves are all part of that nervous system. And what's really interesting is now not only is alcohol going to cause these imbalances in neurotransmitters, our brains kind of feel good, or our brains kind of hormonal pathways, if you will, but that also affects the rest of the nervous system. And what a lot of people don't understand, as we were mentioning a few moments ago too, Dave, is how important nutrients are for nervous system function, nervous system regulation. Part of the reason why, if we drink too much, we can develop wet brain, quote unquote, is that's actually a vitamin B1 deficiency. It's been studied for a really long time in people with chronic heavy alcohol use, that they will develop a psychosis, they start to lose coordination of their muscles. This is actually the result of a vitamin B1 deficiency. That is only one of many, many, many nutrients that are affected with alcohol. It just happens to be the one that is really well studied. So it kind of gets a lot of that traction, if you will, when we talk about heavy alcohol use. But really, all of our B vitamins are affected. So B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B12, folate. And these are all our B vitamins, most people don't understand, are really critical for nervous system function. So for our body to relax, for our brain to function, for our cells to produce energy so that we can move, we can think, we can breathe. All of those things are a result of our body being able to produce energy and the requirement needed by the B vitamins. And these B vitamins are also really critical for mood health too. And again, when we are drinking, we kind of create this vicious cycle where we are depleting out these important nutrients, feeling like crap, and then drinking because we feel yucky, and then further depleting these nutrients, right? So it's really critical when we do quit, that we start to replenish and repair these systems. And this can be done by improving what you're eating more fruits and vegetables, eating more protein, minimizing sugar and processed foods. But this is also why I'm a really big proponent of supplementation. My company, Functional Sobriety, last year launched the first ever supplement packs for sober and sober curious. So they are little packets that have a variety of different nutrients in them that are required right after alcohol cessation, for example, because even if we are eating a pretty good diet, it can take some time for these nutrients to restore themselves. And again, that is if you're eating the proper amount of all of these things, which for a lot of people is challenging because maybe they don't know how, they don't know what foods they should be eating, or because, like so many of us, we quit drinking and all we want to do is eat sugar and carbohydrates, right? Which makes that even more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question as well. People ask is about sugar cravings. That's fascinating. People say, oh, I'm eating packets and packets of gummy bears and loads of chocolate and that. Is that the reason?
So part of the reason why this is actually happening is, and there's a big discussion mostly in the space, as you know, Dave, like it's a dopamine thing, right? Like everyone says this is a dopamine thing. Dopamine is also increased by sugar. So when we take away the alcohol, we're looking for the dopamine hit. But the other huge and more important thing, I believe, in my research is around blood sugar. So I have a whole chapter on the endocrine system, which is our hormone system, and focus on blood sugar a lot in my work. And you've probably seen me talk about on social media the importance of increasing protein content. And what happens is, for those of us who have a heavy alcohol use history, we have a tendency toward hypoglycemia, or low blood sugar. It has to do with the fact that when we consume alcohol, it affects how our body and our liver release the hormones that manage our blood sugar levels. And so this is, a little bit of a distinction between, it doesn't matter if the alcohol you're drinking has sugar or carbohydrates, not important. The actual ethanol, the molecule that gets us drunk, is the one that's affecting our blood sugar levels. And even when we stop drinking, we can have these tendencies to experience these drops in blood sugar. And anytime we fall into a state of low blood sugar, what happens is we develop cravings for foods that help increase blood sugar. That is sugar and carbohydrates. So this is very, very common in people with, especially early on in that stage of, within the first couple of months of quitting drinking. But the good news about this versus the dopamine discussion is that we can actually have a lot of control over blood sugar levels by what we eat. So by having more protein throughout the day, by having more consistent meals throughout the day, so never going more than 3 or 4 hours without eating, that's going to help keep our blood sugar a bit more stable throughout the day so that we're not falling into these states of low blood sugar and needing that pick-me-up. The time that most people struggle with the sugar and the alcohol, especially early on, is going to be that afternoon time frame, that 3, 4, 5 o'clock time. And what happens is most of the time we haven't eaten since lunch. Maybe it was 4 hours ago, 5 hours ago. Maybe we had not so healthy of a lunch. And when we're really experiencing that craving or needing that quote unquote willpower, it can simply be low blood sugar. And by choosing something to eat, having something with some protein, some healthy fiber in there, that can take away a craving. And I've seen this work with hundreds of clients. So that is always one of my go-to recommendations, especially if you have the sugar cravings too.
A lot of clients come to me and they say, I ask them what time they eat their dinner. And they say, because of everyone's got busy lifestyles now and kids and whatnot, they go, oh, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And I say, well, why don't you wind it back and have a meal around 5:30? And if you're hungry a little bit later, you can have a handful of almonds or something, You can get a dopamine hit from other things, even a couple of cubes of dark chocolate, But with that as well, do you think it's learned behavior where your brain is saying, this is what time we'd normally drink as well? And there's a lot of sugar in alcohol, isn't there? So, someone could drink between 6 and 8. They're getting the low blood sugar levels there because they're not having the wine as well, aren't they? Is there part of that comes into it?
Yeah, so it's going to, there's a couple of different ways that that's going to affect, but basically because alcohol often contains sugar and carbohydrates, like you're saying, is going to give you a little bit of an increase in blood sugar. but also because it lowers blood sugar. You're going to get these kind of roller coaster ups and downs. And this mechanism is also potentially associated with the reason why we, once we have one drink, we have a craving for another drink, right? We get this spike in blood sugar followed by this drop in blood sugar. And what we do is we kind of keep that going, right? We have another drink, it spikes us back up, it drops us back down, right? And so it kind of keeps us stuck, this blood sugar piece of it kind of keeps us stuck in this cycle of drinking, this cycle of craving. And again, the thing that I like the most about it is that we can actually have a lot of control over this by planning a little bit more strategically when we're eating, what we're eating. And it's okay to, I know that schedules can be challenging and sometimes a later dinner has to happen for some reasons, but there's no excuse as to why, you can't have an afternoon snack that can really get you through that time frame. And even if you feel like you aren't hungry at that time, having something to eat and kind of almost pushing through that urge, whether you actually feel that desire to eat or not, is going to save you later on in the day or in the evening. I can promise you that this works. I have seen it work with, like I said, hundreds of clients around the world. And so if you're someone who's listening and really struggling at that time, put in that snack. I have a lot of examples in the book. I post a lot of, graphics and things on social that have some examples, but a cheese plate, sometimes I'm doing like a little turkey roll up or a cup of cottage cheese with some berries, something with some protein and a little bit of healthy fiber is going to kind of help hold you over and take away that word willpower, right? Because oftentimes we put this pressure on ourselves that maybe I'm not strong enough to do it. I don't know why, for some reason, I can't say no to this. And a lot of times it's our body sending us a signal saying, I need something, right? And it's our job to, especially if we're on this sobriety journey, get more in touch and in tune with those signals that our body is sending us and not just putting alcohol on top of every feeling that we feel, which is the previous thing that maybe we've been doing.
Yeah, and learn habits as well. A lot of people that, like, a lot of me including, was like part of my day was drinking. It becomes so woven into my lifestyle of drinking. And when you stop drinking, you can feel a high level of anxiety. And what can you suggest to people listening that feeling at the moment? Because it's a big thing to stop drinking, especially for me. I drank 40 years, right? From a kid, 14 years old. And when I stopped drinking, there was so many elements. It wasn't just the practical side of dealing with cravings, triggers, what my mates are going to say. It was how am I going to manage life without my crutch, So what would you suggest for people that are going through high levels of anxiety now?
Yeah, so there's a few things that I would suggest for that. And coming off of this conversation that we're having on blood sugar, that's an important piece too. A lot of people don't recognize how much their blood sugar levels, the foods that they're eating, the amount of time that we're going in between meals, that plays a really big role in how we feel, including our mood and our anxiety. It's very common when we're in a state of low blood sugar to experience anxiety. That the best example I can give of that is and I don't know if you had this there, Dave, in the UK, but in the US, there are these Snickers commercials about, if you're hungry, you get to the state of low blood sugar, you're going to chew someone's head off. Basically, you need to have something to eat. Well, the Snickers isn't necessarily the best way to raise your blood sugar because it's going to create more issues in the future. But we can experience anxiety because of that. And again, the big thing that I, want to point out here is when it comes to nutrition and utilizing food as part of your sobriety journey, this doesn't need to be like a total overhaul of your lifestyle. This isn't, get sober and go keto and intermittent fast all at the same time. I'm actually really soft about my recommendations and really adamant about making small changes that can have a really big impact and effect. But I also am a big proponent of using supplementation. to support things like anxiety. I oftentimes will use, and I talk more about these in the book, things like amino acids like L-theanine that can help to support, naturally support and reduce anxiety or symptoms of anxiety. But the other big thing, as you know, Dave, aside from nutrition recommendations, is the things that we always talk about, like finding community and surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded, that are maybe on a sober or sober curious journey that you can connect with, that can help you walk through this process. It was never meant to be done alone. And it's really important for us to find other people that we can relate to on this journey who can help us navigate this huge change. Just like you
Mm,
said, Dave, if you're not drinking 40 years, you were drinking 30 years or 20 years, and so it's a very, very big change. And it's really hard for us to change if everyone else around us is still drinking, or if everyone else around us is still operating exactly the same, and we're the only ones trying to change our habits and our lifestyle. And so finding places where we can feel like we relate to people, or that they are in a similar point where we are, is going to help alleviate that anxiety, because it's going to give us more opportunity to connect and to
mm.
feel accepted and to feel inspired.
Yeah. And that's why I love what you said about willpower, because we quite often beat ourselves up. And, a lot of us who've drank for years, we have low self-esteem, lack of self-belief. And if we've tried 2, 3, 5, 10 times, our running narrative is, I'm useless, I'm a failure, I'm no good. Right. And by meeting community gives you the option of talking to people without judgment, and you would tell them of a story of I hate the word failure anyway. I call it a learning, you know. Um, but until you meet these people that go, I really hear you. I've been there as well. I understand how you're feeling, is such a huge thing. And that's what really helped me in the beginning, because I was surrounded by people that drank for my whole life. That they were the groups of friends I had curated myself. And when I stopped drinking, I stuck out like a sore thumb, and also I got the thing, you never stop, and I didn't think I could either. So I had to remove myself from those groups and find different groups as well, which I did after probably 6 weeks. And I've spoken about it before, Brooke, where I came out of this event of people and I actually said, I cannot believe they're normal. Like, I mean, that's ridiculous. I don't know what I thought sober people would look like, but that's quite often what people think, right? Like a load of oddballs in a room. Do you know what I mean? But there were people from all walks of life, all going through the same thing, welcome me in there, whether it's AA or this was a separate thing, a social event and whatnot. And it really gave me the boost to think, do you know what? I can do this. And as you've explained this wonderful interview with you, that with the right nutrition, the right supplementation, the right connection, self-belief, education as well, it doesn't have to be a quick lit. There's so many amazing books out there like yours, and there's Dopamine Nation, learning about that. So many different books, and you in with a real good fighting chance, aren't you?
Yeah, I really believe that in addition to the community, the other really big piece that has helped me is the education. And I think exactly what you're saying has helped you and so many others. A lot of the people that I work with find that the science really helps them understand it a little bit more. It helps make it a little bit more tangible, and gives them a little bit more to hang their hat on, rather than maybe the previous notions of, this is just, it is what it is. This is, a card you've been dealt and now you have to deal with it. Whereas I really believe that through food, through supplementation, through lifestyle changes, we can change our biochemistry. We can change the genes that we turn on or turn off by the lifestyles that we live. We can, use these tools to help support the choices that we move using forward or going forward. And so this is something that I really believe has the power to affect us in a way that we didn't have before. We
Mm.
didn't have a lot of this science and this research even 5 years ago. And now we're really seeing that, even knowing some of the science and the ways that alcohol is truly affecting the cardiovascular system and the brain and contributing to cancer. All of these things are additional layers of insulation for when it comes to the choices that we make and the reasons that we maybe decide to stay sober or not.
Yeah, it's true. Even things have changed so much in the 5 years that I've been sober, and you know, the power of Google as well. You get really you get curious about it, don't you? You get curious about how your neurotransmitters change when you drink, and you know how it affects your sleep. I mean, we haven't covered that one. That's a big one that I remember when I was thinking about stopping. My main thing was, oh, do you know what? I won't sleep tonight. And obviously, you don't sleep properly anyway if you drink. But there's the other thing of when you stop drinking, quite often your sleep's disrupted. Um, what could you recommend to people to maybe give them the confidence to not have that in their conversation of, oh, I won't sleep tonight if I don't drink?
Well, it's often a crutch, right? It's often we're looking for that excuse of why we should make this decision or why it's the right decision. And exactly like you mentioned, alcohol does not help sleep. It makes sleep disrupted. It doesn't allow us to get into deeper levels of sleep, doesn't allow us to get into more restorative types of sleep. Most people will wake up in the middle of the night. Some of that actually has to do with when the alcohol is being metabolized, how that affects things like blood sugar and changes in the liver, for example. And so oftentimes people will say that when they first quit or cut back, that they're struggling with sleep, or maybe that becomes a reason why they might introduce it again. Sleep regulates quite quickly, usually within a couple of weeks. And so I typically say to people, just hang on through those couple of weeks because it will start to improve naturally. But a lot of times sleep is the result of imbalances in cortisol, one of our body's stress hormones that actually supports our sleep-wake cycle, our circadian rhythm. And there's a lot that we can do, not only through supplementation to support cortisol, balancing cortisol, things like adaptogens can help with balancing cortisol, but there's also a lot of really great herbs that can help with sleep that I talk about in the book, things like valerian root, for example. There's great research behind this in combination with other things like California poppy and passion flower. So there's a lot of things that you can try that aren't alcohol that may be able to solve that issue for you. And if you haven't tried things like this, it might be a good place to start, especially if you're feeling like sleep is one of those things that you're kind of hanging on to, that belief around alcohol. Just even knowing that there are other solutions might be able to kind of help break that pattern.
And that's part of what I always say when people come to me. It's all about making a plan, a bespoke plan, right? Because I always say you and me could drink a bottle of wine each and we've got a completely different relationship with alcohol. Comparison is a killer, I think. You know, it's about you and what works for you, finding the right foods, right supplements, the right education even. Like I'm quite sciencey. I love that. Some people, they run to the hills when it comes to that. So finding the right groups, you know, some people identify with AA and others don't. You know, it's finding your own bespoke plan that works for you and keeping consistent to it, I believe. Brooke, honestly, it's been a fabulous interview. Thank you so much. Before we go, though, I've written a book and it was really difficult for me. How was it writing your book? Was it a joy or did you find it quite hard work?
Well, I have to say both, because while I enjoyed the process, it is definitely a slog. It's definitely a lot of work. It's definitely hard work. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, I'll tell you that. But it was something that for me, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt called to do this. I felt called to write this book, and I felt really called to use my experience in a unique way, in a unique, to create something unique in this world that we're working in right now, Dave, that is still really a new area. We're trailblazing a lot of these discussions around alcohol in this century, because we've done a lot of really great work, and Alcoholics Anonymous is so monumental and foundational, but it was also founded almost 100 years ago, right? It was long before social media. It was long before a lot of the research that we have today. And there's a lot of opportunity for us in this space, and anyone who's listening too, to stand up and to say, I want to be a part of this change. I want to be a part of this message. And we're breaking a lot of stigma by doing that. And I think the science really helps that too, because there's still a lot of stigma. And we've come a long way in the last 5 years, but I still think we have a really long way to go. But I really think that the science is going to be the thing that really helps to make a change, because it isn't about the person. It is not about, and yes, and we didn't get much into the alcohol as a disease conversation, but yes, we are responsible for the actions that we take, or the history that we might have with it. But alcohol itself is a toxic and addictive substance to anyone who drinks it. And so that is something that we need to work on, continuing to push the message and the narrative around, that this is not a moral failure. This is not about really you as a person. This is about the substance. This is about how the substance affects your biochemistry. And by, I think, coming to terms with that and pushing our society in a direction that looks at alcohol in a different way, we're going to change this discussion around alcohol and hopefully influence the way that people use alcohol in the future.
I absolutely love that, what you've just said there, because I had a traumatic experience when I was 14 years old, and I turned to alcohol, which quickly stopped me thinking about that traumatic experience. And I used alcohol 40 years to not only just blot that out, but all the bad decisions I made based off of my drinking as well, and those traumatic experiences from the past. And I'm also vulnerable to alcohol, because since I had this DNA test, I've found out I'm low in vitamin D, low in serotonin, and I've got a faulty dopamine receptor as well, which is like flags of, hey, if you take this highly toxic, addictive drug, you're going to get highly addicted to it. Do you know what I mean? So it's all this. I didn't stand a chance, I literally didn't stand a chance. So I don't look at it. Of course, I picked up the glass and drank it, but it worked for me. It was a tool in my life for a long time. But now I've found ways to live my life without that in my life. And that's the best thing I've ever done. And I really appreciate you saying what you did there at the end, because that's how I view things as well. So thank you so much for that. Your book, How to Eat to Change How You Drink, is out now. I'm going to put all your links on my show notes. It's been an absolute joy talking to you. Dr. Brooke Scheller, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. So happy to be here today. And I hope everyone walks away with a little nugget from today.
I'm sure they will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.